Welcome to the first ever roundtable of Septemicists. You are witnessing the inception of the global grassroots Septemics movement. That's what this is about. This is a gathering of hand-picked people, handpicked by me, the author, to discuss this subject. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Jim Marshall. I am the developer of Septemics and the author of the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. I've done over 380 interviews. So at this point, it makes sense to gather a bunch of people together, all of whom have read the book and whose opinions I respect. So we're going to discuss it. This is entirely unrehearsed. I want it to be spontaneous. First, I'd like to say to all of our panelists, speak slowly so that people can understand what you're saying. Sometimes people talk quickly and forget that it's hard to follow. I'd like to go around and have each of us introduce ourselves, starting with our host, Peter Dedes. Tell us who you are, where you are, and why you're here.
I'm in southwest England, in the toe of the country, in Devon. I work as a mentor, a podcaster, an evolutionary astrologer, and an archetypal psychologist.
Chris, go ahead.
My name is Chris. I'm the host of the Presti Initiative. I am also a professional martial arts instructor located in the Chicagoland area.
Peter Wright.
Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Wright. I spent most of my life in Africa, but I was born in London, UK. Other Peter, so not far from you. I have been in Canada for about 21 years because of political upheaval in Zimbabwe. I am a podcast and YouTube host. I had the privilege of interviewing Jim twice, I think, last year and the year before. Fascinated by Jim's book and the subject. Unfortunately, I don't have the book with me today. I was so impressed with it, I lent it to someone, forgot to write down who I'd lent it to, and they haven't returned it. So I'm going to have to buy another copy. I've searched my whole house for it before the show. So I apologize.
I was also born in London, but a different hospital from you, probably. I have also had the privilege of hosting Jim twice on my podcast, Truth and Transcendence. I live in Wales, which is that lump on the left-hand side of the UK. Other than podcasting, I run transformational workshops, do some coaching, and wander around the Welsh hills talking to sheep.
Adriana.
Oh, hi, good morning. First of all, thank you, Jim, for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here. I'm a regular reader. My expertise is interior design and French and international studies. I'm a regular person, a common person who has been benefited a lot for the reading of this book. This book has been marvelous to me in my personal life.
And tell us where you're located.
Nice to meet you all. And hi, Jim.
Where are you, Adriana?
Oh, yes, I am at Los Mochis, Sinaloa in Mexico. I live here on the coast. And I've lived some time in Canada and the United States also.
Okay, great. Now, I'd like to go around and have each of you give an opening statement. Peter Dedes, kick us off.
I want to say, first of all, I've been privileged to have the extraordinary opportunity to conduct in-depth interviews with you, Jim. We've explored each of the 35 scales in comprehensive detail over a period of 18 months. These conversations have revealed layers of insight and application that extend far beyond what appears in the written text. I've come to understand that I'm not merely dealing with a philosophical system or psychological theory, but what appears to be a precise technology of consciousness that operates according to discoverable natural laws. And I see that this establishes an authority in the world of consciousness. What has emerged from this extensive exploration is a recognition that Septemics may interface powerfully with many other systems that map human development and cosmic timing. In my case, it's in evolutionary astrology and archetypal psychology. This potential integration raises many profound questions about how we understand consciousness evolution, optimal timing for development, and the relationship between individual growth and collective transformation. I think each one of us brings a unique experience and perspective to our understanding of human development. Some of you may have extensive practical experience applying septemic principles in various contexts, and others may bring complementary knowledge from related fields, but everybody brings a valuable asset. My approach today is to have an approach with the same empirical rigor that characterizes Septemics itself. I want to prioritize observable phenomena over theoretical preferences, practical applications over abstract discussions, and honest questions over polite agreement. Jim, you've emphasized repeatedly that these scales describe natural law as distinct from opinion, which means they can withstand any genuine scrutiny we can bring to bear. And I've had many significant insights that have emerged from my conversations with you, particularly regarding applications and implications that weren't fully developed in the original text. So in this exploration today, we are participating in the early development of what could become essential tools for conscious human evolution. If we discover limitations or contradictions in what I'm proposing, that's equally valuable because it helps refine greater accuracy and effectiveness. Either way, engaging in this work can significantly impact how human beings understand and navigate their development for generations to come. There's an imperative that I'm seeing. The most striking insight I'm seeing is that it represents exactly the kind of systematic empirical approach to consciousness that this new era demands. The last age gave us mystical traditions, religious hierarchies, faith-based approaches to spiritual development, and those serve their purpose, but they often lack the precision and universal applicability that our increasingly interconnected world requires. So I see Septemics emerges as what I would call spiritual engineering. It's like a technology of consciousness that transcends cultural, religious, and personal belief systems. And your engineering background, Jim, is not coincidental. I think it's prophetic. I think this age requires a practical toolkit of understanding that works regardless of one's spiritual orientation, cultural background, personal beliefs, provides the universal principles of human development that operate as reliably as physical laws.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you. Crispine.
What really struck me as profound about Septemics was the glossary of terms before each of the chapters. And what that did was gave anybody who was reading a basic understanding of what the text was going to entail. And moreover than that, it told us how to interpret the words that were on the page so that there was no mysterious or misinterpretation of what was there. The words were clearly defined so that everybody reading could understand what was going on as we were reading it. The other thing that strikes me as really interesting is anybody could pick up one small section, one chapter of this book, and immediately see where they're at on the scale. From there, they can see the progression of where they have to go next. Depending on what scale it is, they can see who they should be aligning themselves with to further their development. And another fascinating thing is one of the tenets of Septemics is not to tell anybody where they are on the scale, but to give them the scale and let them decipher for themselves where they are on the scale. And I think what that does is that allows an area of self-discoverability. And with that self-discoverability, then they have, whoever is reading this wanting to progress, they have ownership over that item for themselves. They can see where they are, the steps they need to take in order to get ahead, or what they need to do to stay where they are if they're okay with that. And while they can see where other people may be on the scale, telling them is not something to do, but rather to show them. And I think that is a book, is a philosophy, is an understanding that somebody could, I think that probably anybody interacting with anybody else on any sort of social scale needs to have some understanding of this book. And I think that if we could do that, so that's managers, that's in the workforce, pretty well anybody interacting with somebody else, especially higher ups interacting with the lowers, because then they can understand how to interact with them appropriately. They can see where they're at on those scales. They can give them the information as they are able to understand it at the level they can understand it. And then if they provide them with the scale, they can allow some coaching and development to further progress where that person would like to progress. So it doesn't matter if it's relationship based, if it's in a workforce based, but a simple understanding, an idea of where these people are that you're interacting with, no matter what domain you're in, really affects how well you can affect them and how well you can clearly communicate to them across whatever endeavor you are doing. And I think it is fabulous that there is such a system like this. The beauty of this is it doesn't matter what scale you look at first. You open the book, pick, okay, yep, and then you can read and see that's where I am. That I clearly understand this as me. And then you can see where to go from there. Fabulously designed, and I think it is wonderful that we can be together to discuss how this is impactful for people as a greater.
Thank you, Chris. Peter Wright.
Okay, so for me, my background, having been brought up in the country called Rhodesia, which was very conservative, very British-oriented education system, very much stiff upper lip, don't show emotions. I don't want to paint English people as unemotional, don't get me wrong, Peter and Catherine, but certainly in our climate, men didn't cry, men didn't hug, men didn't express emotion. So I was brought up, started farming, then went into the corporate world, became a manager mainly in marketing and sales, had quite a large staff, and then my own business. Was not exposed to any sort of psychological or philosophical education in my early years until middle age, and then became fascinated by it. For a lot of my life, particularly dealing with employees and in the sales and marketing game, always puzzled why people behaved as they did, why people said what they did, and why some people behave totally different to others with the same set of stresses, conditions, or situations. And it's always been a puzzle that I couldn't really work out until I came across your book, Jim, Septemics, and started speaking to you. It was like switching on a light bulb, because so much of what I could not fathom out before about my own and other people's behavior, it suddenly made sense. That was the biggest breakthrough for me, being able to have a framework to analyze and understand why people said what they did and behaved as they did. So thank you for that. It's made a big difference in my life.
Thank you, Peter. Adriana.
Oh, hi. I've been very happy reading Septemics. I think it's a wonderful way of be a better person for me and for others. And in my personal experience, I could say I'm a common reader, that many people who's going to read it, who's not an expert in the sense of psychology, philosophy, or whatever, I can tell my experience on this is I have understood many things that I didn't. I had a bad relationship with my children and former husband, and I couldn't understand why. I had therapists and family therapists, and nobody could get into the point. And the point is exactly that we are living in different levels. So that is why we don't understand each other or one another. Reading this book, I found that in these 35 scales, most of them, we are in different levels. All of us, as a family of 4, essentially 3 of them are mostly in the same levels, and me in another level. So I really cannot agree with many things because of that. If my son is motivated by distraction, I cannot do anything about it. And I felt guilty most of the time because I couldn't get along with them. This book has brought me peace of mind, peace of heart, because I understand now that I cannot change anybody who doesn't want to change. So this is very interesting when you said that if you don't want to change, if you're in one level and do not want to go up, there's nothing to do. It's in AA, in Alcoholics Anonymous. First step is acceptance. So you have to accept first time and then try to get better. But if somebody doesn't want to get better, doesn't want to get rid of an addiction, there's nothing to do. I cannot do anything about it. Now I have to accept that. I have to agree with that. And now I'm in peace, even though I cannot agree with them in many issues, because if they're gonna take a party as a basic purpose, like pleasure, and then I can deal with that. So I've learned a lot in all these scales and levels, and I'm trying to get in levels. And I think from 4 to 1, you can live a better life with better feelings. Every time you get bad feelings, you're going down. I feel better. I actually feel better. I thank you, Jim, because if this is a really interesting discovery of natural law, then there's nothing to do with opinions. I think, no, this is facts. And these are facts, and it works. It really works. I found it to work. So thanks for that, Jim.
Thanks, Adriana. Catherine.
What a beautiful, touching story. Thank you so much, Adriana, for sharing that, because you clearly pulled yourself out of a very hard situation. So I honor that. I feel like there's a few things about Septemics that I find really appealing. One of them is the granularity, that in each of the areas, you can dive down as deep and as complicated and detailed as you want to, or you don't have to. So that granularity, I think, is helpful, because often when people are looking at their own growth and expansion, they find themselves overwhelmed with all these different things they could work on. Right, I should be working on my health, my fitness, my work productivity. Oh no, my ability to relax. Oh no, my ability to think, my ability to feel. All these different things that we think we have to get perfect yesterday. But I love with Septemics that because there are all these different scales, you can actually choose, all right, I'm going to look at all of them before I try and do anything, or I'm going to home in on one of them and explore that and work with that, which means that we can consciously do what I call selective neglect. We can consciously say, I'm currently not looking at these other areas, and that's my choice. It's not because I'm useless and hopeless and can't cope with looking at other things. It's because I've realized I can't necessarily do everything all at once. And I think it lends itself beautifully to that, because it means we can then circle back whenever we want to and go back to the other scales and look at those. Another thing I like about it is that it's not saying, as I understand it, it doesn't summarize and say, go through all of these scales, and you are then, because of all your readings on all the scales, you are now a level 4 human. It doesn't say that. It says, you are where you are on each of these scales. So you're not comparing yourself with one integrated ideal on every level in every area and aspect of your life, which I think is a deadening thing to do. And it's something, again, a lot of us think we have to do or expect ourselves to do. I think it's much healthier to be able to say, I'm doing really well in this area here. I'm having difficulties in this area there. There's an area here I've never heard of. Perhaps I could do with learning something about that. And that's a much more multifaceted and permission-giving way for us to interact with ourselves and who we are and how we are in life. And I'll just say one more thing, which is it's very evident in the book, Jim, that you have actually digested and then redigested and then redigested and then redigested and split it apart and integrated and pulled it apart and integrated and redigested and reworded. So you've made the results of a very extended period of time of research and exploration and experience extremely accessible and digestible for people by having done all of that work. And I think a lot of people, when they see the book, may not realize that's what you've done. But I also get that you don't mind about that. You just want them to find the book useful. So I really honor that humility, generosity, diligence in you that you brought to bear in creating this particular piece of work. So I could say more, but that'll do.
Thank you. Okay, so now I want to ask, starting with Peter Dedes, what would you like to say or ask specifically about Septemics?
Over the last 18 months of being immersed in Septemics with you, Jim, I think for the first time, what I'm seeing in human history is this is a comprehensive mapping system that can precisely locate where any individual or group stands on virtually any aspect of human development, and to predict, if that's the right word, what comes next, and provide guidance for advancement. This represents a quantum leap from the generalized wisdom teachings of previous eras. What strikes me most profoundly about Septemics is its inherently democratic nature, which perfectly aligns with the principles of equality and universal access to knowledge. Traditional spiritual and psychological systems often create hierarchies where certain individuals were deemed more qualified to guide others' development. Teachers, gurus, therapists, clergy, they all became gatekeepers of transformational knowledge. Septemics demolishes these artificial hierarchies by making the principles of development universally accessible and self-applicable. I think once you understand the scales, you become your own most qualified assessor and guide. You don't need permission from an authority figure to recognize your current level or work towards the next one. The democratization of developmental wisdom represents this profound shift of the ideal of individual sovereignty within collective understanding. Your statement that anyone intelligent enough to understand it and wise enough to use it can apply Septemics because it reveals its egalitarian foundation. It doesn't require special initiation, psychic abilities, or years of study under a master. It requires honesty, intelligence, and the willingness to turn your observer on accurately. And I think these qualities are potentially available to every human being. One of the most crucial insights about Septemics for our current era is how it eliminates what contemporary teachers call spiritual bypassing. This is the tendency to use spiritual concepts and practices to avoid dealing with psychological and practical developmental work. So the fundamental rule that one can only move to adjacent levels represents perhaps the most important psychological insight of our time. I remember I struggled with this and you had to repeat it to me. But this principle makes it impossible to practice a theater of deception about one's developmental level, or to skip necessary stages through intellectual understanding, emotional manipulation, or wishful thinking. In the previous era, many spiritual traditions encouraged forms of bypassing that suggested that ordinary human development could be transcended through faith and devotion or mystical experiences. Maybe those approaches produced some genuine results for some individuals, but they also created widespread confusion, among practitioners who believe they'd achieved advanced spiritual states while remaining functionally undeveloped in basic areas of human competence. And Septemics cuts through this confusion with surgical precision. If you cannot demonstrate level 3 competence in a particular area, you simply are not a level 3, regardless of your spiritual experiences, your beliefs, your aspirations. So this empirical honesty serves as a profound corrective to millennia of spiritual self-deception. And perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Septemics is how it addresses both individual and group development through separate but interconnected scales. And this dual focus perfectly reflects the challenge of balancing individual authenticity with collective responsibility.
Thank you. Chris, what would you like to say or ask about this?
Yeah, okay, so Peter talked about the internal observer, and I think that is a unique point. I want to underline that a little bit, because I think that once we can see where the scales are, we get a base understanding of where we are on the scale, we can look out, and not that we're telling other people where they are, but we can see where they are on the scale so that we can best interact with them. And I think that once that kind of observer switch is clicked on, then what that does is that allows us to see those interactions in a different light. It allows us to understand those interactions in a different way, because we can observe almost from the outside, looking in, how those things are happening, not just from me talking to you, but we're seeing it from the outside. That internal observer, I think, is the key point to being able to understand, and not only to understand, but it's like the first step that has to happen in order for you to correctly place or get an idea of where you are on any scale. Because until you can observe yourself from the objective point of view, from the outside, it's really difficult, because you might think, oh yeah, I'm this level on this scale, but that's not necessarily true until you actually can observe yourself from the outside. And if you can observe yourself from the outside to place yourself on that scale, that outside observance is such a wildly fundamental skill that is so helpful in a myriad of different ways. Then you can start to observe your interactions with other people. You can then take that and overlay the Septemic scales to see, okay, well, this person's here on this scale. So as I'm interacting with this person, I need to be able to interact with them so they can best understand. So I need to be like this way as I'm interacting. But until you can do that, I think from the objective outside kind of observer perspective, then you are missing that. And I think that being able to flip that switch on, again, is so profound and so helpful, not just as it relates to Septemics, but as it relates to anything else, because that outside perspective is so helpful, because we often see ourselves from the inside, and we interact with things from the inside and our own internal thoughts, feelings, and emotions. But until we can do that from the outside, which I think Septemics is the way to start that, because it allows us to think from the outside, I think is wildly helpful. On top of that, I think that, so you talked about a question, and as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of a question that I can ask that would be beneficial. As it relates to Septemics, I have two kind of questions. The scales that we have presented in the text, is that the end-all be-all of Septemics? Meaning, are there perhaps more scales that are yet to be discovered? Have you been working on any other scales? And if so, can you share some of that with us, if you're willing? And then the second question is, what would be the best way that we can, as a group, share Septemics with others without necessarily giving somebody a book is one thing, but helping them utilize that book as a tool to help them understand and hopefully improve their life is a whole nother thing. So what would that conversation kind of look would be the second question.
Okay. So first of all, as far as helping people, if you recall, in the section called Introduction to Septemics, which is the largest section of the book, there's a whole area there that explains how to use it to help someone else, and has a lot of specific instructions. It's pretty granular, so that would be my reference on that. As far as other scales, I think one of the advantages of having spent 25 years writing this book is that I've pretty much gotten to the bottom of the mind. Now, are there other scales? That is speculative. If I had to guess, I would think probably there are other scales, but I haven't figured them out. Now, what I have said a few times is it's possible that people who are a lot smarter than humans might be able to find other scales. In other words, I already know that there are many races and trillions of people in this galaxy who are much smarter than the smartest human, and they might be able to see more scales. But I have been looking for scales, and I've invited my associates and such to tell me if they can find one, and nobody has ever come up with one. Although one guy did try. He found a 7-level scale, but it wasn't a septemic scale, did not meet the qualifications. So I think I answered your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Catherine, anything you want to say?
Yeah, this is asking a question, isn't it? I've got 2 questions actually, and I've forgotten what the second one is. Oh God. I'll ask the first one and then the second one might come back. I got distracted by the BRB business happening.
Okay.
So you said about the Septemics movement. I just wondered whether you have any kind of vision or imagining of what you see that unfolding, or are you simply in a place of somehow knowing that is beginning and excited to find out what it is? What's your feeling on that? And while you're answering that, my second question might possibly come back.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I could say about that. First of all, I have been saying for many years, most of the copies of this book will sell after I'm dead, because this is the type of thing where you get the book, and then 5 years later, your husband's having some problem. And you say, Joe, look at this, see? And then he looks, and then he gets his copy. Hello, Lorraine.
Hi.
Welcome. And then he will use it for his son, and then his son will get a copy. So it's definitely a grassroots thing. And it can't be anything else because of its nature. So that's one answer. Another answer is, one of the reasons that I came up with this idea of doing the roundtable was to get a we out of this. So basically, Septemics has been a creation of mine, and at some point, I'm not going to be here. So if this is going to continue, somebody else is going to have to do it.
Yeah.
So this is like a little down payment on that idea to see, because as I've said in the book and otherwise, I've said that the heliocentric theory took 1,800 years to catch on. And that's something that's physically observable and provable. Thinking that this is going to catch on in my lifetime is just foolish. It's childish relative to the magnitude of the material. What I often say is there's 2 groups of people. The large group is people who don't know what it is. And the other group is people who love it. Those are the 2 groups. This is something where once you get it, you realize this is a life-changing thing, and you've got some very basic information organic to the universe that you can utilize to your advantage.
Thank
Okay.
you. That's beautifully clear. My second question has come back
Yes.
now. When we were doing I can't remember which of the interviews, but we ended up talking about, you were emphasizing that this is about human phenomena as distinct from transcendent human experience or expression or whatever. You were very clear about that, and we discussed it for a bit. I just feel like that might be really valuable if you felt like just explaining that now, because some of the people watching and listening to this would find that very useful, that distinction, because you were saying this is about being a human in the best possible way, because we are physically human, we are corporeal right now, so we may as well make it work if we possibly can. And there are whole other aspects of experience and expression which are also very important, but not in Septemics. Does that make sense as a question?
Yes.
And would you mind sharing about that?
Absolutely. So let me just say, I think you all know this, but I had a long career as a human development engineer, where for 40 years I worked one-on-one with hundreds of people and helped them all. And that's how I discovered these phenomena, just by observing what went on in the session and making notes. Now, I should tell you that I have a fantastic amount of knowledge about things beyond humans. I was born with psychic abilities. I've had a lot of experience with dealing with angels, ETs, or various other experiences. So that's really a larger part of my life than Septemics. But the reason that I created the book was I could see this will really help people.
Yeah.
So that's why I put it together. And it's basically my gift to the people of Earth. I'll be leaving here soon, and I'll be leaving something good behind. And I hope somebody besides me gets behind this thing to help people get it. If I had $1 million lying around, I could do a lot. I could take out ads in the New York Times and et cetera, but I don't. It might be conceivable that somebody who has a lot of money might get behind this thing and get it to spread. Somebody like Bill Gates, Elon, or somebody like that, who's a lot of Peter Thiel, people who are very bright and have money to burn, might look at this and say, wow, I'm going to make this spread. And that's just a question of standard PR. There's all kinds of companies out there. For $50,000 a month, they'll promote your book in a big way. So maybe something like that is going to happen, and maybe it won't. But there's only so much I as one person can do. The last 4 years, I've been doing interviews, over 380 interviews, and one way or another, that's fairly time consuming. So I think I answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, Lorraine, please tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself to our little group.
I'm Lorraine Hadia. I'm the founder of Prolific Writer's Life. I work with writers and found out about Jim's book in a local chiropractic acupuncture massage center and was fascinated with it and ended up meeting Jim, and he spoke at one of my writing groups that we have here locally. When I first picked it up, I just thought, oh, it's just like some scales, and that seems pretty obvious and everything. And then when you invited me to be on this, I bought the book, Jim. It's like with many books, I have many books, many authors want me to read their books, and I don't have time to read them all. So when you invited me to come here today, I said, okay, that was my chance to read this book. I'm going to dive into it and see what it's about. And I was really blown away about how powerful of a tool this can be, not only for individuals, but also for, I mean, you came from this from a therapist perspective, but I also saw that the way that you wrote it, it's also very much like a reference tool for an individual to use as a self-help book, also to use in terms of a relationship book. What are relations with other people? And then at a larger scale for people who are therapists and at work at other levels where they need to understand people, business owners and people in government and all these different areas that you talk about. So yeah, I found it very helpful, Jim, in that it's almost like mental surgery. When people are writing books, and we have a lot of people who write memoir, and a lot of times when they're writing a memoir, it's because of some tragedy or trauma they went through. So I also saw this as a scale. You could take a book and say, which scale does this book belong to? And what are they trying to resolve in their own psyche? So I think it's a great reference, Jim, and I appreciate the invitation to be here today, but I'm pretty amazed with it, Jim. And like you said, I think there probably are more scales out there. I don't know what they are, but I am definitely going to be referring back to this to see where am I, where is somebody else, or if I have a conflict going on or if something's a little off. This gives me a reference to go in and say, who's involved? Where's this person? Where is this person? What's going on? And where's that static?
Was there anything you wanted to say or ask about Septemics?
Yes, I would like to ask you something, Jim. Since I found it very useful for myself, and even in the book, actually in the scale of scholarship and the literacy thing, most of the people in the world is not in a level of understanding easily many things. I would like to ask you if you're planning to do some book like Septemics in a more easy way for understanding everyone. Since I've recommended the book, many friends have told me I don't understand very well. So I was wondering if there's going to be another book more reachable to most of the people and also in another languages.
Okay. As far as languages, I'm not even thinking about that. It hasn't come up. And English is the main language of the industrialized world. So getting it out in English is my main concern. If somebody wants to translate it, I would be willing to cooperate with that, but I don't know how much I could help. Obviously, if somebody's going to translate it into Russian or Chinese, I can't help them with that. I don't know those languages. But what was the other thing that you asked about? Oh, and a simpler version. There's not going to be a simpler version. This is as simple as it gets. Believe me, I took 25 years making this as simple as it can be. I know I succeeded pretty well because I've been watching people respond to this now for almost 30 years. You don't have to be a college graduate to get this. Just ordinary people get it. Oh yeah, this makes sense to me, you know. So have a desire to dumb it down would do any good, because if you're not at a certain level of consciousness, this is just going to go over your head anyway.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
I know we're running out of time with you. How has Septemics specifically benefited you?
Who are you speaking to?
Catherine.
All right, great. I haven't worked with it particularly. I've just more tuned into it to try and get some understanding of it, and I've put it out to my followers and so forth. So I've more been passing it on. So I haven't as yet worked with it. But it is something that I would be interested to work with as and when I wanted to sit down and do that kind of analysis. But I've got other ways and methods of self-assessing and tuning into where I am and what my next shift might be, which are perhaps a bit less analytical. So that's just where I am at this particular point in my life. Throughout my life, I go through different phases, and sometimes I'm at a point where using a framework really is necessary for me. And other times I'm in a place where another way of doing it is more fitting for my kind of where I am in my life in that point. So I'm in one of those places at the moment.
And now let me ask you, is there any specific Septemic scale that you would like to discuss in any way?
You're asking me again?
Yeah.
Or all of us?
I'm asking you specifically.
No, there isn't one particularly that I would want to pick out to discuss. I think they're all really interesting, actually. Probably, perhaps, I think the mind does tend to look at these things and say, okay, which is my favorite scale, or which is the one I think is more important? But actually, when I've looked at it, I've felt, no, there isn't one that's more important than another. They're all really important. So no, there isn't one.
Okay. So Lorraine, is there anything you would like to say or ask about the Septemics?
When you said which one would I like to discuss, one of the ones that stood out for me as an authorpreneur is the scale of management. And I was fascinated by how some of these are circular and some you get to the top and then you start back at the bottom or vice versa. And some of them there are different people as teams. And this one, the scale of management reminded me of one. And of course, this is under the section with the groups. But I thought this was fascinating, Jim. And I think this would make a really interesting workshop just for business owners. Like this is like an entry point for business owners to see this one, understand it, and then maybe get interested in more of them, or how some of these different areas would fly off into another one in here related to how people are in business. That one really struck me.
Okay. So now, Peter, any specific Septemic scale you'd like to discuss?
I don't have a specific one in mind. We've gone through so much in the 35 episodes, but one of the things that I am very curious about is the number 7 and the sacred geometry of 7 in soul evolution, because the number 7 represents a completion of a cycle before transcendence into a new octave. And the musical metaphor that you use is profound, because in evolutionary astrology, this mirrors the soul's journey through 7 stages of development before quantum leaping to a higher level of consciousness. I'm curious about the sacred geometry of these levels. As an example, I looked at the 7 traditional planets as septemic governors. So Saturn is limitation, restriction, crystallized karma, the prison of unconscious patterns. What level can I put that through? Mars is the first stirrings of will. It's the impulse, the reactive energy, the fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system. Level 3 could be Mercury, which is mental recognition and analysis and a communication about the pattern, and so on and so forth, right up to level 7. I'm seeing correlations here, trying to make them, as well as with Jungian archetypal patterns from unconscious identity and encounter with the shadow and the recognition of anima and animus and ego and self-dialogue and active imagination, integration of opposites and approaching the self. But these all correlate with planets and the seventh harmonic and septiles. I'm not going to go into that because that's a huge area of research that I'm currently involved in. But to me, the 35 septemic scales suggest a pentagonal organization of sevenfold wisdom, perhaps representing the 5 elements that are expressing themselves through the 7 levels of development through the natal charts. I'm seeing this really as a comprehensive map of human development across multiple dimensions simultaneously. As an example, when I look at the 24 individual scales and the 11 group scales, I was thinking of was the mathematics of consciousness evolution. So the mathematical elegance of Septemics, 35 scales organized in 7-level hierarchies, suggests to me that the consciousness evolution follows discoverable patterns rather than random or arbitrary processes. This aligns perfectly with this age of rational investigation and systematic understanding of natural phenomena. The fact that these patterns emerge from empirical observation rather than theoretical speculation makes them extremely valuable for our scientific age.
It might be worth mentioning, there's a section in Introduction to Septemics called Why 7, and I explain precisely why 7. It's a mathematical explanation, and it's fairly simple. Like most of mathematics, it's fairly simple. You have to understand it, but I think I explain it pretty clearly.
Yeah, you do. It's
So
so elegant.
If you want to see it. Okay, so Adriana, was there any specific scale you would like to discuss?
Yes, I would love to discuss the scale of, for example, motivation. I think we usually make decisions or do things without even knowing what is the real motivation for us to do one thing or another. This has brought me light to see why my kids, for example, make some choices, which is quite related motivation choices in a way of intentions. What intention do you have for doing this or that thing? And now I understand more the motivation they have sometimes for what they do, even though they're not aware of that. Instead of me getting angry or in disagreement all the time or trying to lecture them on what they have to do or not to do, now with Septemics, I'm learning that I have to accept that they have different motivations, that I'm not going to change. Many of the scales come one to another in my personal experience, and control is another one of those that I thought control was like imposing something to another person. And now I've learned that control, it means something different. So many scales, they mix with me in my personal experience. And I'm having like epiphany of now I have to do this and that going up, because I was living with a guilt in many issues in my life, that I don't have to live with guilt because it's out of my force to change that, because it's natural law. And so I have to move up, even though it looks a little bit egocentrical or like a person selfishness or selfish. But instead of being selfish, it's being, I see it now as an improvement of myself, and not to be stuck from the 4 level below. So every time I go to the 4th level and up, I make a better person of myself. So I think many scales, they mixed in some themes or relationships. So that's what I think.
Okay, Chris?
Thanks.
If I could say that the scale that I think was really thought-provoking was the scale of thought and how that relates to the scale of communication, because I think that thinking, in order to think through something, firstly, a lot of people are not thinking basically, period. They're just using other people's thoughts. But in order to think clearly, you are speaking and communicating your thoughts. And in order to do that means that the scale of thought and the scale of communication are intrinsically connected, even though that the scale of thought is a individual scale and the scale of communication is a group scale, because as you're communicating, you're more or less communicating with others. So whether you are thinking through the ideas in your head in order to deliver them to somebody else on paper or via video or some sort of communication, or you're just thinking out loud and you're speaking those thoughts, I think that the thought process and defining your thoughts clearly enough for them to actually be thoughts, and then communicating those thoughts thereafter or in connection to developing those thoughts is an interesting relationship.
One of the things that I've come to appreciate about the scale of thought is this whole idea that people think at different levels is a revolutionary idea. People do not have that idea. And that is why very often this is like nothing you can do to talk somebody out of something if they're at a certain level. If a guy is at a lower level of thought, that's where he is. And it doesn't matter how persuasive you are. He's not at that level of thought. You would have to bring him up to a higher level of thought. For example, if you take people who are professional criminals, okay? I don't think any of them are analytical. That's level 3. They're at lower levels of thought. And so lots of luck trying to get through to them because they don't think that way. Their minds operate at a lower level. I would think of it as a sluggish level. So again, this is a theme that's been coming out a lot today. You learn this is the way it is, and you can look at it objectively. So most people have children, spouses, family members, friends who have terrible situations going on. They get arrested, they become drug addicts, whatever it is, and they're really stymied as to what can I do about this? And very often the answer is nothing. There's nothing you can do about it. And if you are emotional about it, then it takes a toll on you. But if you look at it analytically, meaning these are the scales, these are the facts, where is this person on this scale? And if you spot, this guy's at level 5 on the scale of thought, that's the end of that discussion. That's my comment about the scale that I'd like to discuss. Okay, Lorraine, what would you like to say?
I just think it's fascinating. And Jim, I had so many ahas and insights all throughout the book. I penciled it up all over the place. But it gave me kind of a relief. Like you said, if somebody, you have this example in there about somebody who, I don't know if this is the one about finances. If somebody, you give them $1 million and the next week they'll be poor again because the house you give them won't be good enough or the house will burn down, or it doesn't matter. You can pour into it, but you can't change the level that they're at, no matter how hard you might think you can try, unless they're really ready and willing to do something. So for me, reading the book gave me some sense of relief. And literally, I feel like I have a reference tool to just go in and dive in. And when something's going on, why is this happening? Especially in a relationship situation, like you said. So I wish I didn't miss the first hour, but I'm definitely more engaged, Jim. I know how passionate you are about this. I've seen you for years. Right now, I have 380 podcasts. Clearly, you are on a mission to get this word out. And I hope for you as well that somebody will pick this up and put it out to some organization or I don't know, something to bring it to more attention. But it does have to be, to me, this is a LinkedIn conversation versus a Facebook conversation or an Instagram conversation, because you need a certain level of person to even start the conversation with. And Adriana, I think it was you who said, will there be a simpler version of this? It would be fun to have a children's book of this, because I think, Jim, maybe you're not the one to write it, but I think there are ways to plant little tiny seeds, like the example I gave of going to talk to businessmen and then you just tell them this is chapter whatever in my book. And it's just planting a little seed that will maybe grow enough for them to want to see the whole flower. I love how Peter described it as a pentagram of human consciousness, really. I don't remember what word you used, Peter, but just very fascinating. Yeah.
And if I can jump in on that a little bit, I don't know what the conversation would look like, but I know Jordan Peterson has the Peterson Academy. I think this would be a wonderful fit if you can get it in front of him in order to present that as an idea to teach as a course in that university, because I think that would be a wonderful way to introduce that. And I think that those people, the people that are in that type of program, would be really accepting to learn and further progress and share this knowledge with others.
I was hoping, since I've done so many interviews that they're all over the internet, it's not just 380, because most of them get placed on 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different platforms. So we're getting up into some numbers that somebody would come across and say, this is interesting, and contact me about it. That has never happened. I have had a few people see that and say, may I interview you? And of course we do it. But I'm not optimistic about the near future of the human race. If there were an easy way to get something like this to proliferate, there would be more of a cause to be optimistic about the human race. But if you just look at what's going on, the craziness and the violence and the stupidity, it's overwhelming. And as I mentioned in the book, think about what was done to Jesus, what was done to Martin Luther King, what was done to William Wallace, Abraham Lincoln. Trump was a half an inch away from having his brains blown out like Jack Kennedy. There's not a lot of reason to be optimistic about the human race in the near future. I'm very optimistic about the human race in the far future. But it's worth mentioning that my ability to see through space and time is significant enough that I pretty much know how things are going to turn out, what went on and what's going to happen. And I just keep it to myself. As far as this book, if right now I'm looking at 4 people who've benefited from this. So that's 4 more than would have benefited from it if I didn't put the book out. So that's the way I try to look at it. And that since the general reaction to this book is, wow, that says that this is going to spread on the grassroots, because you're going to have situations that are going to come up where you're going to each share it with your friend or your spouse or whatever, and it'll spread that way. But I'm hoping that maybe somebody has some ideas about how to proliferate this book. I have limitations like everybody else. I'm a very learned person, but I have things that I don't know a lot about. I don't know a lot about promoting books. There are people you can hire, but they want a lot of money. And the most interesting thing about them, I've spoken to some of these people, they guarantee nothing at all. Give me $50,000 and I'll promote your book. Okay, so what am I going to get for that? Well, what do you mean? They absolutely do not guarantee anything. I guess it's like going to Vegas. If you've got $20,000 to blow, you go to Vegas and you blow it and you say, well, it's fun. But not many people can do that. So it's also worth saying that I have expertise in a couple of dozen different subjects. And the reason for that is, while other people were playing video games, watching TV, going to movies, playing golf, going to the beach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I was studying and meditating and researching. So that's the choice I made. I'm the only person in my family who's never been on a cruise. My father went on 38 cruises. Why would I want to go on a cruise? I'm not interested. I'm a serious scholar, and that's my personality. As far as getting somebody to promote this, maybe somebody has an idea or a contact. Chris, you mentioned Jordan Peterson. I have a very high opinion of Jordan Peterson, and I'm sure if you read this book, you would like it. But how do you get it to him? At some point, somebody out there is going to have to run with this ball somehow and say, my brother-in-law knows Peter Thiel. Let me see if I can get him a copy of this book, because I know a lot about Peter Thiel. He would like this book. And I could see him putting up $100,000 to promote it easily. That's a rounding error for him. But in general, if you look at the human race, for example, the Romans had steam engines. They never utilized them. They never said, why don't we use this, put it on wheels, and we can travel around. They didn't do that. They didn't say, why don't we connect this to a big boat and have it run the boat? No, they just kept rowing. So The fact that they had steam engines, they didn't connect it. It didn't proliferate until James Watt, 1800 years later. In general, that's what goes on in the human race. And I've studied enough about Earth to know that's what goes on. So now I want to ask, in general, are there any questions for me from anyone?
Jim, can I just make a comment on your concept of marketing? So this book, it's very obviously the dark cover. So maybe that shows a lot of seriousness. This definitely represents who you are, what you like to do, and so forth. Now, first of all, nobody's going to search the word Septemics because they never heard of it, right? That's the main title of the book. So from a book perspective, when you're doing book marketing, this says, okay, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. It almost has two subtitles. And then the next subtitle is Analysis, Prediction, and Management of Human Affairs. So this comes across as a very serious book, which is okay because that's who your audience is. You're trying to get people who are intelligent. Chris, I think you had a good suggestion, but there are different areas. Every single one of these scales is another marketing opportunity. If you can get somebody in starting to crack the book open and understanding even one of them, they'll probably get curious about more of them. And I don't know how you've structured all your podcast interviews. Is it always just about Septemics, or are you actually changing? Let me just give one more example. We were trying to figure out the title for my next book coming out. It's called Finish Your Book, Plug into the Power of a Writing Community and Get It Done. So finish your book. It tells people right away, oh, I want to finish my book. It's offering when you go to Costco and they offer you a little, you're hungry and they give you a little taste of food and you're like, oh, I'm hungry. I want to eat that. So you got to know a person's problem. And then they say, oh, I have that problem. Can you help me? And then you got them on the hook, and then you can pull them in and give them that information. That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of people out there who would have all kinds of great ideas about how to do this, and they all want a lot of money, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. One other thing I should mention is that I've done my general interviews, but then I've done interviews about specific scales too.
Okay.
So if somebody tunes into one of my interviews with Chris or Peter, where I talk about a specific scale, I say, scale of attack, what does that? And then I explain it. This is important. See? So there is some of that out there. I have been encouraging hosts to have me back to discuss specific scales. Some have done it. Most people don't want to do that for whatever reason. The truth about the human race is this. The vast majority of people, I would say 99%, live in a box. And they're not going to get out of that box. They don't want to get out of that box. One of the things that sobered me up in my youth was I was a very successful young person. I won scholarships and graduated with honors and was an athlete and et cetera, a musician, and had all these beautiful girlfriends. And I thought when I was young that people would say to me, how do you do that? How did you manage? That didn't happen. Like a lot of people would come up to me and say, gee, you look great. Like when I was 30 or 40, you look great. And they didn't say, how'd you do it? In other words, they're incurious. I would have told them. People still come to me and say, gee, you look very young for your age. And I say, yeah, well, if you want, I'll tell you how I did it. And most of them don't want to hear it. So people are just incurious. So obviously, I say all the time, this is a book for anyone who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself or others. And I calculate that to be about half of the human race as far as wanting to improve oneself or others. Now, of course, then you have to realize only a percentage of them can read English reasonably well. So, Adriana, I think since your native language is other than English and you live in a foreign country, you probably have many friends who speak English, enough for us to have a conversation, but they're going to have trouble with this book. Look at the scale of literacy. There are 7 levels of literacy. And as I say in that chapter, most people think, hey, you're illiterate, you're illiterate. No, that's binary. There are 7 levels of literacy, and they're quite distinct. And if you're not literate enough, you're not going to get it. So
That's right.
as I pointed out many times, as I pointed out, Lorraine, when I spoke to your group, most people don't read books. Of the people who do read books, most of them read fiction books. Of the ones who read nonfiction books, 90% are in a niche. Mathematicians read mathematics books, psychologists read psychology books, etc. Historians read history books. This doesn't fit any of those things. This is an entirely new subject. So the entree that one would have into society is not there for this book. For example, to give a frame of reference, Einstein with the theory of relativity. The theory of relativity is about math and physics. All right, he wrote one paper which was released in 1905, another released in 1915, in which he presented these. He presented them to the math and physics community. And if you knew math and physics, you read the paper. And if you didn't, so that's a very different thing from what I'm doing here. I'm trying to reach the average person. But as most people know, you get drowned out. So I don't think I have to tell you that 95% of everything on the internet is just trash. And 5% of it is worthwhile stuff. I've gotten pretty good at ferreting it out, figuring out, look at it for 3 seconds. This is trash, next. But that's human society. That's why there's a need for this book. But looking at it the other way, people like you who have this book, you have this tremendous advantage. You have a power that other people do not have. Now, I often tell this story about this beautiful blonde that I met about 6 months ago, and we were very interested in one another. And as we're having our usual getting to know you discussions, well, what kind of music do you like? What kind of movies do you like? Et cetera, et cetera. We had a half a dozen or so discussions like that, which is normal. And I noticed while I was discussing these things that she was low on a certain scale. Okay. So then we had another, she's low on this other scale. And we had another discussion. She's low on this other scale. Wait a minute. This is a downscale person. Because there comes a point when you're analyzing people with this stuff where the light bulb goes on over your head and you say, this is somebody I want in my life, but this is somebody I don't want in your life. And so I just said to her, pass, no thanks. She was absolutely shocked. There was no argument or anything. I just could see that she was going to be a pain in the ass because, yes, she was beautiful and glamorous and congenial and all that stuff, but I knew this material, and so I saved myself a lot of heartache and irritation and money and time by figuring this out and just ending it. So that is a power that you have with this book. I can see somebody, and it doesn't take much for me to say, this guy's a downscale person, we're done. And it's not judgmental. It's like saying this guy's a tulip and this guy's a rose.
So, Jim, where do we go to find intellectual people? Like, where do they hang out? Clearly, they're leaders, they're busy, they're probably running businesses, they're doing good things for the world, right?
Yes.
And they're busy people, and they're in many cases, they're probably minding their own business. But I wonder this too, Jim, how do I get myself around more people who are intellectual? Because I run a writing community. Many of the people that come to our community, they all are well-read, they're very intelligent. But we also have people who are writing one book. It's their first book ever. They're not quite sure what to do. So we have a range of all kinds of levels when it comes to the literacy and the communication and all of that. But where do we go to find people who are thinking at this level?
Yeah, I don't know anybody who has that answer. Anybody here have that answer? I think we have to realize that there's a limited number of people. And as you said, they're busy with what they're doing. One of the things I observed is that people who are successful are generally people who mind their own business. The guy's got a practice, he's taking care of it. He's got a family, he's taking care of it. He's got a body, he's taking care of it. How much time is left over after that? Not much. People sometimes ask me about recreation. I say, recreation? Are you kidding? What recreation? There is no recreation. It's just going from this task to the next task. Where can I squeeze this interview in? Where can I make time to exercise? It's just like never enough hours in the day. And that's how most successful people are. Any comments?
Yes, I agree with that, because when you're focused on your own business, then you don't have much time left. If you find yourself that it is important to work and to exercise, and then having fun takes time, then you don't want to take that.
That's right.
So you keep yourself like that.
Lorraine, you made a comment about the look of the book, and you correctly noticed that I'm a serious person. If I weren't a serious person, then I wouldn't have been able to figure this out, and I wouldn't have spent 25 years writing the book in a way that people would understand. And there are very few serious-minded people. Most people are interested in things that I'm not at all interested in, and vice versa. I don't get invited to parties. Why? I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do drugs. I don't philander. I don't gamble. What am I going to do there? See? So people who do those things, they congregate together. And I think a lot of people, I actually spoke to a close friend of mine some years ago about, I said to him, a lot of people admire me. My whole life, since I was a kid, I've been achieving things for which people admired me. Wow, you won a scholarship. But very few people like me. And he said, I think it's because they're intimidated by you. I said, I don't get it. I'm respectful. I'm congenial. I'm polite. I communicate easily. But somehow being a serious-minded person that comes across, and so they're intimidated. And that wasn't an entirely new idea to me. But the fact that somebody I know who's smart could look at me and say, yeah, that's what's going on here. It happens with a lot of serious-minded people. The biggest thing that I learned in all of my 28 years of education is that in any area, you name it, driving a bus, cooking, playing baseball, raising a kid, it's ad infinitum. There are only a few correct things, and there's always an infinitude of wrong ones. There is an infinitude of wrong ways to raise a child, and only a few right ones. And that's true for everything. So the whole point of education is you learn the right things. See, you go to chemistry and you're like, that's how you do qualitative analysis. That's how you do quantitative analysis. This is how. So you learn the thing. It's very specific and it's narrow. And that is the truth about life, that in any area, there's only a few correct things, an infinitude of wrong things. And I have found that throughout my life. Like, for example, I coached baseball. I played baseball, amateur baseball when I was young. As an adult, I coached it. And I would just look at the kid. I could see what he was doing wrong. I'd say, this is the right way to do it. And then he would do it. And that goes for everything. So the result of that is when you're a very knowledgeable person, in a sense, you are confined to these areas of correctitude. In other words, the more you know, the less gullible you are. The smarter you get, the more difficult it is for somebody to lead you down the garden path or to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. And I think that comes across. I'm sure there are people who look at me and say, I'm not going to try to sell this guy these phony stocks. I'll sell them to somebody else. So I think that's true in general for smart people. And of course, people who are in a position to help, I mentioned Peter Thiel, Jordan Peterson, and Elon, they can help a lot of people. And they do. They are helping a lot of people in different ways. They have scams coming their way 24 hours a day. And they have offices of people to keep the scams away from them. And how do you get through those offices? I had a very good friend of mine many years ago. We worked together, very close friend. He also was an engineer and a musician. And he said to me, you need a public relations officer. He could just see that. And he saw right away that I had talent and he wanted to work with me, that I knew what I was talking about. But he could see that I needed a public relations officer. And I said, yeah, you're right. I guess I actually did hire a guy a couple of years ago to connect me with hosts for interviews. Paid him a certain amount of money. And he could not find a single host to interview me. Not one. So he just gave me my money back. So what does that mean? It's interesting because I contact people online 7 days a week. And I already know that this book would change that person's life for the better. And they're not going to get it. They're not going to read it. In other words, like I have a lot of hosts who say, wow, what you're doing is really interesting, but that's not what my podcast is about. So that's just part of being in a niche or a box. And that's how people are. That's how most of the human race is. I get to talk to smart people like you four about something that's of interest, and how to get it to proliferate is another thing. I don't know if that's going to happen. How come nobody came to the Roman emperor and said, we've got these steam engines that open these doors for us. Why don't we hook it up to a chariot instead of the horses? And we could go 10 times faster. Nobody ever did that. You see, that would have changed the whole history of the human race. Imagine if the Romans figured out how to use steam engines, what they could have done. They wouldn't have fallen in the 4th century. The barbarians they would have just wiped them right out. That's the nature of humanity. And studying the human race as I have throughout my life, it's pretty clear what's been going on Earth. The patterns are there. And I actually was aware years ago that as a result of all of my education and more than that, my meditation, that I was actually painting myself into a corner. Because most of what I think about, most of what I know, people have no clue. So and every once in a while, I'll try to raise a little bit of a discussion with somebody about something interesting, and they're not receptive. And usually I'll do it by facts. And look at the scale of belief. People who are at or near the bottom of the scale of belief, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they're not going to get it. And the truth is that most of the people are near the bottom of the scales rather than near the top of the scales. That's why you have riots going on in LA and October 7th with the Israelis 2 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Russians and the Ukrainians wiping one another out. What is the point? That's the human race. Now, there have always been people in the human race who, by the way, I went out of my way to study, like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Pythagoras and Cicero and Thomas Aquinas, who were way above it. That's who I studied. And those are the people I think of as my teachers. And I'm sure that's true for all intellectuals. Unfortunately, as I said, most people get in a box and they're not going to get out of it. You have to be inquisitive, and which is how I was born inquisitive. As I've mentioned many times, I was that irritating kid who always said, how does the refrigerator work? How does the television work? How does the radio work? How does the air conditioner work? Like when I was 3 or 4. And they said, get out of here, kid, don't bother me. That's what led me to Septemics, being incurably inquisitive. And I'm still incurably inquisitive. And that inquisitiveness keeps carrying me closer and closer to where I want to be. And the closer I get, the more isolated I am. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that happens. I studied with the Jesuits. In case you don't know, the Jesuits are the intellectuals of the Catholic Church. And the men who taught me in prep school, it was like an all-star team. My algebra teacher had been an engineer. He gave up engineering to teach algebra to 13-year-old boys. So the Society of Jesus is full of people like that. My biology teacher graduated Harvard. He didn't have to be teaching biology to 14-year-olds. And so being around those people had a big influence on me because I could see each of these guys was an intellectual and was the reason they joined the Jesuits is they didn't fit in society. They found a place where they could all be together. We could all be intellectual Christians together. And they are a cult. Now, you don't hear people talking about the Jesuits as a cult because it's politically incorrect. But I was close to those people for 4 years. They're a cult. They live right there in the school. They don't have any families. They don't have any possessions. And I worshiped. These guys changed my life. So that's what you get. Those people, they go into an ashram or some religious community. The people who are not like that are the people out in society who are wrecking everything. Any questions?
Yeah, Jim.
Great, yes.
So I'm just looking at your website right now, septemics.com.
Yeah.
And one of the really important things about a website is the main call to action.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we have here, get your book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever, and then introduction. And there's a about the author and a contact, the normal stuff. But we don't have at the front on this website is call to action. Do you want people to obviously buy my book? That's a clear one for an author, if this is an author website. But I think you're beyond the author, Jim. You're trying to give this gift to the world you are giving this gift to the world, and never underestimate even that one right person finds it. It's not always about the numbers. Sometimes it's about the one right connection. But right. I do think on your website, when I come here, because I look at author websites all the time, what is that call to action? Do you want people to sign up for your program? Do you want them to buy my book, read my book, but sign up for my newsletter? That can be sometimes even the more powerful thing is sign up for my newsletter, because even if they're not ready to spend 20 bucks on a book or 15 bucks on a book, they're like, oh, that looks interesting. Okay, I'll get the newsletter. Do you have a newsletter?
No,
Okay, so those are things to think about, a call to action.
right.
What do you want people, like, how can, like, here's an example. You have 35, so you could go through this book every 35 weeks or once a year, for example, and have a program like that. I'm just making things up. You could
Right.
have a newsletter, and maybe you don't want to do that, but I think something that gets people excited, like, hey, are you tired of dealing with problems in your life? Would you like a solution to, what's that? What's your problem? And I have an answer. Call to action situation. So I would recommend thinking about that on your website, because you have been a master, Jim. I actually tell some of our other authors, hey, I know this author who's been on hundreds of podcasts. Who has that stamina? Who has that passion for their book? We have people who've written 15 books, but they don't even market those books. They just want to write the next one. But this book has a lot of meaning in your life and a lot of power. That's something I would really recommend thinking about, is that call to action on your homepage of your website.
Uh-huh. I don't know really anything about that. You're getting into an area that's something that I'm ignorant about. I've often said I would make a terrible salesman. I'm not somebody who could be a salesman. And what you're suggesting is a type of salesmanship. It rubs me the wrong way. And I'm sure if I wanted to spend enough money, I could find people who would do a lot of the things that you're suggesting and more. As far as a newsletter, do I really have time to add a newsletter to my life? There are only 24 hours in a day, and I don't see how I could fit that in. I have a lot of things going on and never enough time. So the idea I'm going to add something, I'm in a stage of life of what can I get rid of so that I have some time? And I've been doing things like regarding my diet, like buying foods that instead of cooking from scratch like I used to, buying prepared things. So that saves me 20 minutes. And that 20 minutes I could spend managing my finances or exercising. I have an acupuncturist who's a very smart lady. And she said to me, she's into most of the same things I'm into. And she said, it takes a lot of time to take care of your body. And she was saying it from the angle of, I'm not taking the time that you are. So anyway, everything takes some time, and there's a limited amount of time. And there's also such a thing as will you fit in the world? I'm still teaching. And as you may gather, I'm a really good teacher. Doesn't matter what the subject is. I don't care what the subject is. It's establishing a rapport with the student, watching the student, seeing, did he get this or didn't he? Oh, he didn't get it. Let's straighten that out. I'm still teaching. Now, that's been a part of my life all along. And should I throw that out? I don't know. You tell
Jim,
me.
that right there could be the call to action. Schedule me for your podcast, schedule me for your whatever, like that in itself. If you being out there teaching and bringing this book behind you, that is a call to action. Absolutely, that has to align with where you are and what you're doing. But I don't know, Jim. Like I said, I bought the book out of courtesy because I buy a lot of author books, because I go to a lot of author events. I know a lot of them. But what actually got me to read this is when you invited me to come to this podcast, this teaching,
Right.
you might call it.
So there you go. That's the situation. Peter?
I've just got to go because I've got a call, but you're an architect of human understanding, and your gift to humanity transcends the boundaries of any single discipline or tradition. I think in an age where we're locked into this machinery of distraction and confusion, which masquerades as complexity and opinion, the substitutes for observation that you've provided are extraordinary, because this is a precise map of human consciousness development based on natural law rather than theoretical speculation. I know in the work that we've done together on all the podcasts we've done, I recognize the decades you spent observing human phenomena with the disciplined eye of an engineer and the patient heart of a scholar have yielded treasures that will serve consciousness evolution, I hope, for generations to come. You saw patterns where we may see chaos. You discovered order where others accepted randomness, and you articulated with crystalline clarity what has remained hidden despite existing in plain sight throughout human history. And the 35 scales, to me, represent more than academic achievement. They constitute a technology of awakening that democratizes access to developmental wisdom, previously available only, as I mentioned earlier, through rare teachers or fortunate circumstance. But you've given us, every sincere seeker, the tools to assess accurately where we stand and understand precisely what comes next and navigate that growth with unprecedented clarity and efficiency. And the empirical rigor with which you approach this work honors both the scientific method and the sacred nature of human development. And your insistence that these scales describe observable facts as distinct from personal opinions ensures their reliability across cultures, beliefs, and individual differences. So there's a universality that makes Septemics perhaps the first truly global framework for understanding consciousness evolution. And I want to salute your courage in presenting these discoveries, despite the inevitable resistance from those who profit from human confusion. This demonstrates the deep compassion that motivated your research. And you probably knew that some would misunderstand, others may attack you, many would ignore what you offered, but you've persisted because you are organized and propelled at a very deep soul level to recognize the urgent need for precise tools to navigate the challenges facing human consciousness. The mathematical elegance of 7-level hierarchies organizing 35 scales reveals a profound order and brings coherence out of chaos in human behavior. This suggests you've discovered rather than invented these patterns, and uncovering natural laws as fundamental as those governing physical phenomena. And I think such discoveries represent the highest function of human intelligence. It reveals truth that serves all beings. Your distinction between linear and spiral scales, that provides crucial insights into the nature of development itself, because when we understand which patterns repeat at higher octaves versus those that build permanently upon previous achievements, that prevents countless errors in both individual growth and collective evolution. This discrimination alone could save humanity enormous suffering and wasted effort. So the predictive power you've given us through understanding that people can only move to adjacent levels eliminates the spiritual bypassing and developmental Neptunian fantasy that plague most growth methodologies. And your insistence on honest assessment and systematic advancement creates reliable pathways where previously only hope and guesswork existed. So your integration of the individual and group scales has this recognition of the fundamental interdependence between personal development and collective evolution. This is so sophisticated in one way, but it also prevents the narcissistic individualism that characterizes much contemporary personal development, while also avoiding the collectivist approaches that ignore individual responsibility and growth. So I think the whole timing of your work's emergence as humanity transitions from one age to another seems providential rather than coincidental. And I think the precision tools you've provided arrive exactly when our species faces challenges that require unprecedented levels of individual competence and collective intelligence. So your contribution may prove essential for navigating the transformations ahead. And I know you have a background in engineering that has brought unique gifts to this investigation, that purely psychological, which is how I was approaching it, but psychological or purely or just spiritual approaches may have missed, because the systematic observation and empirical validation and practical application orientation that characterizes your work creates bridges between scientific rigor and consciousness development. And that serves both domains magnificently. So the accessibility of your writing, despite its intellectual demands, and I know Lorraine was talking about the title of the book, and sometimes you do need a rational title in order to pursue the irrational, although it's not irrational at all to us. But for many people, it can seem that way. But you wrote for those who would actually use these tools rather than just discussing them, ensuring that your discoveries could benefit real human lives and situations. Your prediction about the resistance from the illiterate and the malicious and the greedy shows a clear-eyed understanding of the forces that oppose human development. And this forewarning can help sincere and honest practitioners navigate the inevitable opposition while maintaining compassion for those who cannot recognize the value of what you offer. So the humility with which you present these discoveries, these momentous discoveries, to me reflects the spiritual maturity that enabled you to perceive them accurately. And I think lesser individuals might have claimed a mystical revelation or proprietary insight, but you consistently acknowledge that you discovered rather than created these patterns, positioning yourself as a servant rather than master of the truths you reveal. So your work, the culmination of humanity's long journey toward self-understanding, and simultaneously opens up new territories for exploration and development. The comprehensive nature of your mapping provides completion, while the precision of your methodology enables a deeper investigation of consciousness development. I think future generations will recognize you among one of the greatest contributors to human knowledge and awakening. Your scales will guide countless individuals towards greater competence, fulfillment, while serving the collective evolution in ways that I can't even imagine that at the moment from my current developmental position. But I want to express my gratitude to you, because lives are transformed through applying your discoveries, and that extends beyond just my personal appreciation to recognition of service to the entire human family. You have given our species tools for conscious evolution that will influence, and I know I've been using it with my clients, and it will influence consciousness development, especially if we can get it in front of some of these people for centuries to come. And the brilliant analysis contained within your book, it's in every person who uses these principles to advance their development and help others do the same. So each application of set understanding multiplies the impact of your original insight. It creates what I call the pebble effect, where you're putting in one pebble, another pebble, and another pebble, and that creates ripples of awakening. One ripple reinforces the other, and that honors your contribution while serving the greater good. I want to thank you for the years of careful observation that have yielded these treasures. I want to thank you for the intellectual courage to articulate what you discovered, despite knowing the loneliness, that it would challenge comfortable assumptions. I want to thank you for the spiritual generosity that motivated you to share what could have remained private knowledge. And most profoundly, thank you for trusting me and hopefully trusting humanity with these powerful tools for consciousness development. Despite what is happening with our species, I still have faith in our capacity to use wisdom responsibly. The highest development that you have cultivated, these scales that inspire us, that are so worthy of the gifts that you've provided. So with boundless appreciation and unwavering commitment to honoring your work through faithful application and transmission, I think those who recognize the magnitude of what you have given is vast.
Thanks, Peter. Adriana, you want to say a few words in closing?
I would like to say something. I want to thank you too, because all you have given us with this book. I believe society throughout history has come like a pendulum where the society gets lost and then it comes Puritanism and then it goes losing again. Right now, I think we are in that process of losing ethics and wisdom and right choices and good feelings and spirituality in the young people, especially, and most of the people. So I really would like to see your book in universities, every subject or master degrees or whatever. I think everyone and every young people should go through this, because it is very important to go through life with all the value information of Septemics. And thank you very much. Nice meeting you all. And thanks, Jim, for your invitation. I've been honored. Thanks.
Thanks, Adriana. I guess we have to wrap it up because it's getting late. So,
Jim, may I make just a couple
Sure.
comments?
Sure.
First of all, I thought you said you didn't have a PR team. What Peter just said there, Peter is part of your PR team. He is on it. And the pebble effect, Peter, that was so applicable. You're throwing the pebbles out there, Jim, and it is having a ripple effect. I want to thank you as well. Thank you for the honor to be here today with this group. Thank you, Peter, for the opportunity to be here on your podcast. And Jim, keep doing what you're doing. And by the way, Adriana, this will not make it into today's universities because this is about free thinking. And that's not what our universities will allow in the walls of their universities. However, Jim, homeschool, adult homeschool, it will work there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's a wrap. I appreciate your presence. Thank you very much for contributing. And I'll be in touch with you again sometime soon.
Okay. Thank
you.
you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I wore my shift key. We're going to shift, Jim. We're going to shift the universe.
Okay.